Going live with another Underground Nexus Quickstart guide. It's been a while since there has been an updated Underground Nexus Quickstart guide. What is the Underground Nexus? The Underground Nexus makes cloud engineering for cloud native technologies less chaotic, we'll put it that way. So at a high level, if you aren't familiar with what that might mean, if you work with things like GitLab or GitHub, and you work with things like AWS, Azure, or if you're familiar with any cloud native technologies, then that's what the Underground Nexus is for. Now, what types of applications are cloud native applications? If you have never heard of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, then there are millions around the world, as seen here, at least millions of accounts around the world at least, who are involved with building a whole slew of applications that are meant to help, produce different parts of what makes the cloud when we're talking about something like Azure, AWS, and cloud native computing technologies. It ranges from things like app definition and development, runtime, provisioning. There are all these different types of categories, and so the Underground Nexus falls under the category where we might find something like GitLab. So GitLab actually is something that is on the cloud native computing foundation, basically on the cloud native landscape. So that brings us back to what is the Underground Nexus. If you aren't sure what cloud native is yet, familiarize yourself with that, and then the cloud Underground Nexus cloud is designed to make it so that anything that you are doing with these technologies is not going to be all that complicated compared to what it could be. So let me get my big face out of the way so that I'm not just taking over everything, and we can really take a look at this, right? So let's just take a look at some of the primary features, and then we're just going to learn how do you get started with this thing. The Underground Nexus is something that allows you to basically host servers in the form of Git. Now, that means that you are hosting infrastructure and servers in code. So if you've heard of something like Terraform or infrastructure as code, it is a form of infrastructure as code of saying, hey, I'm just going to build and launch my servers in a virtual form. And you still need to have, bare metal systems to, deploy your nodes to. But the benefit of this is, conventionally we've had big giant data centers for when you're thinking about like, oh, I'm going to use the cloud, I'm going to use AWS, or I'm going to use Azure, some of these things. Well, what if you wanted to say, well, what if I wanted an environment to not just live in AWS or not just live in Azure? What if I wanted it to live everywhere? Maybe I want part of the cloud in my house. Maybe I don't want a data center. So maybe we just want to have part of the cloud live wherever we have different offices around the world. Maybe every single office we have has maybe not one giant data center that we run everything out of, but maybe just like fractions of our business data center and operations all over the world that aren't necessarily even living on the public cloud. It could be living partly in the public cloud, but really this is what's called hybrid cloud. And so the Underground Nexus uses Git for how it uses basic input-output systems. So if you've never heard of BIOS, that stands for Basic Input-Output Systems. And what this means is that the Underground Nexus is a structure that when you install it, say when you install an operating system like Windows or Linux on just like a physical machine server, then that physical machine server has inputs and outputs. And so that operating system has a basic input-output system. And so that allows the operating system to talk to the hardware so that you can do things like take your phone and plug it into your laptop, and you can do things like get pictures off of your phone. So if we are using things like basically, you know, Underground Nexus is a little bit of an operating system for cloud native hosting environments. And if you're using the Underground Nexus, then what that means is that every single system or instance that's running the Underground Nexus is able to basically even integrate all the way down to the hardware level, to where one person could plug something into their computer from their office, and then it shows up for all offices. So if someone's trying to like get some data off of a hard drive, and they're like, oh, someone's like, hey, I need this data off of that hard drive that someone has over in the other office, then this person over there can plug in hard drive, the other person will see that hard drive, they can get that data. Keeps it simple, right? So anyways, that's what the whole idea of a Git-BIOS is to make an input-output system so that you can have a server that acts and feels like something that's living locally and exclusively in your environment, as if you have all the benefits of the office, but at every single site and location that you have engineers doing your engineering. For anyone who has been working in cloud engineering, having access to bare metal, if you've ever had access to bare metal, is a convenient thing. So even if you're using things like AWS and things like that, that does mean that you can tool things like the Underground Nexus to add basic input-output system access, basically bare metal access, to otherwise cloud environments that are just up in AWS and you don't really have that level of access. So that's if you were to get a little crazy with it. Okay, so let's stop with all the craziness and say, well, but how do I build this thing? Because I'm going to tell you it builds itself. You don't actually have to know how it builds itself unless you really want to, which you can come to the DevSecOps Dojo, which you can find on the Cloud Underground website. If you go to cloudunderground.dev, then you will find that there is the DevSecOps Dojo, which is a place if you really wanted to know how these things work, you can do that. But if you don't really care about how it all works and you just want this thing to build itself for you, you want a data center to build itself for you within less than an hour, so that you don't have to know how to build a data center or configure one anyways, then you can come over to the Underground Nexus free download, which it's not going to cost you anything, it's free. So this is a Docker pool, basically a Docker download. So the first thing that you do need to do is it has some guidance and it recommends getting Docker Desktop installed. That is the first thing that you need to do. I am going to let you do that on your own because there are tons of guides on how to install Docker. You can follow their documentation, and one of the things is there are different operating systems out there. Docker works with different operating systems, so I will let you research that piece on your own. But once you have something running Docker, it could be a Raspberry Pi, it could be a laptop, it could be a Chromebook, and maybe you're a student using a Chromebook wishing to work one day in data centers, or maybe you do work in a data center and you don't have access to all of the resources that you need on a routine basis, so you basically sit around twiddling your thumbs for days waiting for approvals that don't come for months while your company is paying you anyways while you can't do anything. That does happen quite a lot when you work in cloud spaces. So if you wanted ways to do things without having to wait for the approvals or having to worry about budget, some of that stuff, come over here, have Docker installed, and if you've never seen Docker Desktop, it looks like this. I already have an Underground Nexus container up and running, so if you use Docker Desktop, that's one version of Docker. If you're using either OS 10, so like an Apple computer, or Windows, like Windows 10 or 11, then this is what it would look like. Otherwise, Docker is a terminal application if you're using Linux. So the way to get started, regardless of what version of Docker you're using, is you'll want to pull up a terminal. No matter what computer you're using, you're going to need a terminal. So you can just say terminal, we can open that terminal. And in our terminal, in this case, it is a Windows PowerShell terminal, but in your terminal, doesn't matter if it's Linux, doesn't matter if it's OS 10, all we want to do is copy this first command in here that says whatever is going to match our hardware, right? So if your hardware is an Apple M1, you want to pay attention not to use these AMD 64 installs. If you're using a Raspberry Pi, also pay attention to the install version for, say, a Raspberry Pi or a NVIDIA Jetson developer box, something along those lines. Otherwise, most systems that you're using, unless it's a laptop, some laptops might be ARM as well, similarly to the Apple's M1 chip. So most are going to use this AMD 64 install. If we select this, then we can copy our install and we simply paste that in here, and that's the joy of it all, is it's really just that simple. Now we do have one more command to paste in. So you just hit enter on that and it's going to do a dance and it's going to do a thing and it'll just complete itself. And once it's no longer doing a thing, if you get some errors, that goes back to you can join the DevSecOps Dojo to learn how to troubleshoot these things. So if we then have a terminal for our next command, then the next command you want is this install step 2, and you're going to select this and you're going to copy it, and then you're just going to paste this next command, and this, once you run this, is going to take a while. It's going to take a good 15 to 45 minutes. That's what you can expect. It's going to take a while. So then you just wait, and while it's doing its thing, you are going to see that the Underground Nexus is going to show up if you're using, say, like Docker Desktop, something along those lines. But once the Underground Nexus completes installing itself, then you are able to head on over to, as the guidance shows us here, we can select where it says go to Portainer. So if I head to this URL, it's going to take us to Portainer, which your Portainer will probably not look like this right away. It will probably look like something else. So anyways, if I select this option here, then we can go over to where it says containers, and the Underground Nexus is going to have this full spread or buffet of containers. Basically applications, an entire data center with all of the resources that you need to start basically doing some cloud engineering. An entire cloud, however have you. So this is what it looks like. We're here. And if we take another step, take a look at this next link where it says go to localhost :1000. If we go to this other link here, it's going to bring us to this handy desktop that's going to appear. Now, don't be alarmed by the white screen. This just means that it is loading this desktop in here. And here we go. We now have the Underground Nexus hanging out here. And if we want to install Chrome RDP, I'm going to recommend Chrome RDP as a great addition, as something that is probably worth using with the Underground Nexus. So let me give you a quick idea of what it looks like to set up Chrome RDP, which if you're accessing the Underground Nexus through a browser like this, then this is going to only allow you to access the Underground Nexus locally. You're not going to be able to access it like globally. So let's say that you wanted to be able to have full remote access to the Underground Nexus no matter where it was actually installed, right? Then the way to do this is simple. It's not as complicated as it might sound. So if you've never seen Chrome RDP, it looks like this. And we want to go over to this option here that says set up via SSH. This is the important piece. And in terms of making this desktop really globally accessible so that you can access it beyond your web browser, then that would be my recommended way to use it. So you'll want to be in Portainer. So let's take a look at Portainer here. If you open in Portainer where it says containers, on the left-hand side here we have containers. We can look for this container that says workbench. And this is how we're going to set up global remote access so that we can access the Underground Nexus no matter where we are away from the system that we install the Underground Nexus on. So right now we can use the Underground Nexus on whatever we're using it on. You'll notice that suddenly if you walk away from the system that you've ran it on and you're on a different network, you're not going to be accessing your Underground Nexus, which is basically a cloud that you can copy paste onto whatever hardware that you want. If we go to Quick Actions and select exec console in our workbench, we can click on connect. And where it says connect here, this gives us an opportunity to then come over here and we can say begin. This is going to give us a little thing and we can say next. And then finally it's going to give us an option for authorize per vulnerability. Do not share your authorized strings with anyone who's not like an admin of your environment. Only share this with admins of your environment. These do time out, so even if I were to share this or one of these links, when I click on authorize, I'm not going to click on authorize here, security. But that's where you select what you will then basically want to paste into here. And so in order for that to work, you'll notice that you'll get an error. So this is the part you want to pay attention to. If you're pasting your authorize Linux string, make sure it says the Linux one. If it says root right here, I'm going to just outright say that installing Chrome RDP is just going to fail. So the way to make Chrome RDP not fail is to type su space dash space abc. And we're going to hit enter. And then that is going to allow us to be where we can now go in here and paste your Chrome RDP SSH string for Linux here. So that's what we want to do. You just paste it in there, and keep in mind that you need this handy dandy command up here, or you're going to get some things that just don't work or don't make sense or are going to make you scratch your head. And when developing, scratching your head is a thing that happens. I scratch mine all the time. So that then allows us to make this desktop. We have different ones, but let's see. Here we go. This is the one that I was using. So one thing I will also say is if I had multiple systems and I wanted to have multiple Underground Nexuses, kind of like having multiple virtual machines or something along those lines, it's pretty easy to have multiple ones where you have different windows. So if I have multiple ones for presentations, so notice that if I switch back and forth on these screens, you can tell when I flip back and forth that these are not the same system. Something I'm going to say about that is this one is running on an ARM machine, which is a Jetson. So basically like a Raspberry Pis, Jetsons, Apple M1s. It all works on our ARM systems just the same way. Everything looks the same way, works the same way. And if we go over and open Firefox as the first thing that we do, that's going to give us something that's very exciting, because in Firefox, it's going to give us, well, a warning first, and then it's going to give us this appreciation for having Firefox in here. On this warning, we can say advanced, and we can say accept the risk. This is you're now living inside the Underground Nexus. We're in the Underground Nexus desktop here. So we're going to accept this risk. And this is going to take us to a hidden website, a hidden domain that lives only in the Underground Nexus. Is a website that you cannot access on the World Wide Web. If you try to get to undergroundops.me outside of the Underground Nexus, you will find that it just doesn't actually exist. It won't let you access it. We do actually own that domain, so it's not going to get sabotaged by someone else, so it's not going to be, someone else owning that domain. So we do own this domain. It's just that this domain literally only exists inside the Underground Nexus itself. This is actually a deep web that lives inside the Underground Nexus, and some things to know about Underground Ops is a commercial managed service provider for the Underground Nexus platform and partners. So for those who are not familiar with Underground Ops provides managed services for things like Blumira. So if you're not familiar with Blumira, then Blumira is one of the most efficient ways to get SIM, especially for small teams or just little commercial teams. You don't have like a giant team that's all enterprise size and things like that. It's not really for hobby. This is more of like a business to business SIM. It's not something that you would probably tinker with. So if you're a student, this probably is not relevant to you unless you're trying to learn how to be a security operations center engineer, something along those lines. But if you're a business and you are, say, like a small business owner, something along those lines, that might be relevant to you. And then the other one is GitLab, and GitLab does power the Git-BIOS, and this entire hidden domain is all powered by GitLab. So I guess if I scroll to the very bottom here, we can just make it known that GitLab is living under the hood here. We're going to get a good look at what it looks like to have an Underground Nexus GitLab environment. You can actually access GitLab, as this shows how do you access your GitLab environment, because you can get that and customize it. So if you were to select GitLab here, I already have an environment set up, but this is a self-hosted undergroundops.me. So this is at gitlab.undergroundops.me. So this is the one that lives there, and this has a full Git-BIOS template set up for basically engineering like custom input-output systems. So that's what this is for, so that you can start building your Underground Nexus for the hardware that you use, for the team that you use, for the technologies that you use. This is going to give you the ability to go and modify things. So being able to come in here and use GitLab. GitLab is GitLab. One of the things that GitLab makes possible with all of this is something called GitLab Geo. And so when we're talking about this whole idea of like Git-BIOS, and let me go back to be a little reminiscent of what we were looking at earlier. How is it that the Underground Nexus can live everywhere at once? So there are different ways to make that possible, but GitLab makes this incredibly easy where what if you do want all of your developer sites to be all around the world and different locations, or just like on the laptops of your developers? Maybe that's where the developer environment primarily scales, is not through servers, but with every developer's laptop, just have them deploy an Underground Nexus instead of paying for cloud space for them. It's an economic way to scale your developer resources, basically by using GitLab Geo. The way that it works is shown here is you have a core continuous GitLab instance, and then all of you can replicate that instance appropriately to make your GitLab environment accessible for all of those who are using the Underground Nexus. The Underground Nexus pre-builds all of this so that you don't actually have to go and set all of this up. It's just in there. And there are trainings for that, so that's a separate thing. So this is not particularly the official GitLab training. This is just getting started on the Underground Nexus itself. So that goes over how is this even possible, because for some they might think, is this possible? This doesn't seem possible to me. But it is possible, and this is what it looks like, the Underground Nexus. So if we take a look at these pins up here, especially starting at this one with Portainer, then we can see that this is just the same Portainer that you can log into outside of here. But then we have the Pi hole, which is a resource that is a convenient resource for using with the Underground Nexus. To get access to the Pi hole, it has us basically enter in this command to log into the Pi hole. So if we wanted to get access to this, everything in the Underground Nexus is monitored by the Pi hole's DNS monitoring. So we can log in here. And whether or not you save your password in here is up to you. If I select these containers to go find Pi-hole in here, we can just type it in our search. It's living in here. We can see that there's DNS. You can also search DNS. So if you search DNS or Pi-hole, that's how you can go over to edit the Pi-hole's terminal, which, going back to where do we get the command, goes back to this little command right here. In Pi-hole itself, we can copy that, and then we can paste this in here. And this is going to let us log into the Pi-hole. Once we have a password set up, we can go to the password setup. And once again, whether you save that in here or not is up to you. We can see that we have however many hosts are showing up that are basically making connections to the internet for whatever they're doing. But we can see the variety of items showing up in our traffic. You can see what's going on. You can see there's some activity from a few different containers over here. So all of these clients are different containers that live in the Underground Nexus itself. So this, for example, is Portainer. So if you look at where it says the name of some of these, notice that we see undergroundops.me. It can see our traffic here. It can see that we've gone to undergroundops.me. And then notice that it also says Olympiad 0. The Pi-hole can tell what you're doing. It says Olympiad 0 right there. So this is a network monitor. So this is a way to get some visibility into what you're doing immediately without having to build visibility 100% from ground up. And as things are making queries to the internet, you can get a good idea of what's happening with your development environment, because you especially want to make sure that your source code is safe. So if you're, engineering sensitive resources in here and you're building stuff that's, licensed and supposed to be protected, you have like keys and things that are sensitive in here. We also have things like a secret vault, so that if you're working with things like secrets, then your Pi-hole can make it a little easier to ensure that your secrets are kept safe, because security matters, right? So keep your secrets safe. Then we also have things like Minio. One thing I want to just outline, if you've ever used Visual Studio Code, there is Visual Studio Code in the form of a browser. One thing that I'll show you in a bit is, how do we access files with Visual Studio Code? It's actually, there's this Nexus bucket. Before I go back to those apps, let's take a look at this Nexus bucket, because if you want to edit something with Visual Studio Code, it needs to go where Visual Studio Code has access to the things. And so we have this directory here that says Visual Studio Code. We can open this, and we have this directory that says workspace. We can open workspace, and this is where, if we make things, like if we add whatever we want to add in there, I don't know, files or something, then we can go to Visual Studio Code and we can say file, new file, and we'll give it a name, some file.txt. And then it's going to ask us where we want to save this. So there is a directory in here that says workspace, and that is where, when we save something in Visual Studio Code, it will show up. I can say okay. Here are some words for this text file. Amazing, we just put words in this text file. So if we then save this, then voila, we now have our code. So Visual Studio Code lives in the browser. This is something that is universal, so things that are in this Nexus bucket are shared across the Nexus structure, and you can have multiple people logging into this. So if you have, say, like 3, 4, 5 developers who all have their own desktops and they're logging in here and they're all working on the same code, then you have a simple way to share your code. And this is also, it's away from the public web if you want it to be, unless you're deploying the Underground Nexus in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform. And do know that if you are deploying the Underground Nexus to some of these other locations, then that's going to, well, the Underground Nexus is a hardened structure, so just pay attention to not have port 1000 going out to the World Wide Web. The Portainer port is a safer port to have as like a back end, like backdoor access to the World Wide Web, because it's password protected, and it also is TLS encrypted right away, so it's a little easier to protect. But for the most part, don't have port 1000 or your web tops facing to the World Wide Web. That is not the best idea. If you're doing that, use the Chrome RDP method for accessing your Underground Nexus if you're using something in the public cloud. If you're using the public cloud, you will be very happy that you're using Chrome RDP for your access. It is the secure way to access the Underground Nexus from public cloud. And if you're experienced and you understand port security, then that's different. If you're new to port security, just keep that in mind. So you can have as many people working in the Underground Nexus as you have basically like memory and computing resources for in your environment. So that goes into Visual Studio Code. Now, what about in terms of shared data? We have S3 buckets. These passwords that I'm entering in here, the default passwords all live in GitHub. So if you wanted to know how to log into any of these, we can scroll down and take a look, especially at number 9 here. Section 9 gives us how we can log into everything. 10 does too, but 9 in particular goes over every single password for accessing all of the Underground Nexus applications. So let's go ahead and go over to this bucket here. So we have Minio, we could have these buckets and things like that. If we go back to the Nexus bucket, then we will notice that we have this S3 torpedo that we can open. And this is another resource that we can just say create bucket. And if I give this a name, then I can say create bucket. This is how we can make basically data that's easy to share using S3. So for those who are familiar with S3, AWS and S3 buckets, this is a great way to manage your data resources. And if we open this, we can now see that there's this thing that says bucket. So the benefit of this is this has access controls so that people can securely access data and be granted like appropriate permissions for whoever's accessing what, which makes a big difference in the context of security, which is why we want to have secure ways to share our data And the bucket system and using this S3 bucket and then making sure that we have a centralized place for doing our Visual Studio Code work for shared files, shared code, things like that. All of this is centralized in a way where access can be made granular and specific so that you don't have the wrong people accessing the wrong things. That's sort of the whole premise behind it. Privilege escalation, all of that good stuff. And it is a DevSecOps platform after all, so all of that is going to be important. So security first, all that good stuff. So that is how you can get started with the Underground Nexus, and I'll let you go and start discovering what you might want to build. I guess some other things that are worth noting here is if you go and take a look at this item that says Traefik API, this shows all of your front-end services for basically the self-healing services within the stack. So that's going to also tell you things like is GitLab deploying appropriately? Is the workbench showing up as it should? There are collaborator workbenches is something to notice. So I'll kind of show you, if you have guests, how do you invite guests into the Underground Nexus? It's built right away to allow you to host guests inside of the Underground Nexus because it's a collaborative environment and a collaborative developer resource that's not meant to be used alone. It's meant to be used with teams. You can use it alone too, and it'll basically scale with you, and it will let you bring in the help that you need when you need it because it's a multi-tenant structure for those who are familiar with that, what that means. So I guess going back over to, what is this collaborator workbench? We have a few items in here. I'll let you spend more time on some of these other items. There's also a security operation center dashboard in here as well, which is so that you can have separate projects and things running in another specialized environment that doesn't execute code the same way as this desktop, which is a security thing, so that you can go and inspect sensitive files there that might otherwise cause corruption to your standard desktop. But instead of doing things that cause corruption to your standard desktop, you can have certain sensitive tasks handled in this security operations center, and you can run dashboards and things like that in there. So if we take a look at the collaborator workbench, then that's going to allow us to go over to where it says accept the risk. And that's going to let us basically just log in to identify a space that allows us to host guests. That's what this is more so for. So it'll load and you'll see that that's just another desktop. So while that's loading, I'll let that load. We can take a look at some of these other items here. But that for the most part goes over the default items that exist in the Underground Nexus. And one thing that you can take a look at is we have the full diagram here for the software factory pipeline for what that would look like. So you can mock up some of these architectures, and then you can also check out the DevSecOps Dojo if trying to get guidance on this sort of thing is interesting, or you can go and check it all out for yourself. And also one thing I will say is that pay attention to this bottom diagram, because Chrome RDP does not work on ARM instances. So if you want to have global remote access for Chrome RDP for an environment that has ARM devices, then you have to set up a Chrome RDP terminal that's AMD64 that would allow you to then have access to your ARM desktops. So going back over here, so this is our collaborator desktop that was loading earlier, and this is, if you have guests coming in here, notice that this desktop does not have access to the bucket. So this is a place where maybe you have someone who you want to show demos to for something. Who knows what you want to do with this collaborator desktop here, but it allows you to keep everything's sort of separate. So you can actually set this up so that Chrome RDP will let other people come in using Chrome RDP. So the way to do that is you'd come over to your menu here, and you can just come over to where it has a terminal in here, and if you open this, then this is where you're already logged in as ABC here, so notice that. And then all you would want to do is just paste in your Chrome RDP SSH Linux authorize string here. So this is what you would paste. This is what you would put here. And this is how you now, boom, now you have someone else who's in here with you. So you can, as much computing power that you have that you want to use, you can just continue to spin up more of these. If you have a beefy environment like this one, for example, because the Underground Nexus, it can run on lower powered devices. So alternatively, this one right here shows that we've got 64 cores going on, and we have 67 gigabytes of RAM that's been allocated to this particular host. So if you have resources, then you can bring in guests, or if it's just your developer box that you do your development on, that's like a home lab, then whether it's something that can handle a lot of guests or not, that's kind of up to where you decide to host your Underground Nexus, and you get to decide how many users do you want to host, decide on the size of the hardware, how many pieces of hardware, how many systems you want to integrate, and you can also cluster Underground Nexus nodes together. By default, the Underground Nexus is a swarm manager, so if you wanted to cluster other Underground Nexuses together, then choose which Underground Nexus is your leader, and then others have them exit their existing default swarm, and then they can join another Nexus swarm, and then now you can have a swarm of a bunch of Underground Nexus workers, and then that's another way to collaborate with others. And then if you're using things like GitLab Geo, then all of a sudden you might wonder, well, how can I really make sure that we have like site reliability, all those things? Well, since the Underground Nexus is indeed powered with GitLab under the hood, since you can come over here and start setting up GitLab, you can set up CI/CD from inside the Underground Nexus itself in your own private instance. This is just a demo, so I haven't gone through and set up this pipeline so that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. But we are going to have trainings on how you can do that sort of a thing. So we'll be doing some collaborations with GitLab either way. And then the GitLab team is very helpful. Or if you are a business and you're a professional company, then it is Underground Ops who provides... So Underground Ops will provide managed services for businesses. If you're not a business, that wouldn't make any sense for you to be getting managed services. But if you're a business and you're like, oh, we use GitLab Ultimate, that's like $1,200 per person. Like some standard consumer who doesn't need GitLab Ultimate's most likely not going to be shelling out that kind of thing. And so if you really have like a dedicated need for like governance and things like that a standard consumer doesn't need, then we do have services as a service provider, and GitLab themselves will also help accommodate the process for whatever anyone needs. So that is thanks to a lot of the new things that we've been working on. So anyways, that is the Underground Nexus. That is how you can get started with the Underground Nexus. This is the Underground Nexus Git-BIOS control panel that will help you get started with default commands, quick reference commands, all that good stuff. And I appreciate you checking out the Underground Nexus. So go have some fun, make something interesting, and don't get too lost in the